1961, a group of church members searched for a way to raise funds to help build the sanctuary of the Sudbury Methodist Church. On April 27th and 28th, an evening of music was presented in the parish hall, now known as Hawes Hall. Elroy's Hawes was the master of ceremonies, and part 2 of the evening was a performance of Gilbert and Sullivan's Trial by Jury, with Priscilla Davis as Director of Dramatics and Betty Farmer as Director of Music.
Ken and I were president of the couples club, and each group in the church was asked to do a fundraiser for the sanctuary. And we thought in the middle of the night one night came to me, Gilbert and Sullivan, I know where I can get the scores. We can borrow the ones from Reading High School, which I had taught there, and I knew that they had done. Well, Priscilla was also a member of the church, and I was chatting with her and found that she was an Emerson graduate and had quite a bit of experience with doing plays, so I asked her if she would work with me on it. We thought at first we'd only have choir members turn out, but we put a little blurb in the paper, and we got quite a few people who had no connection to the church at all. The first show was very well received, and everybody said that it was better than the paid barbershop chorus, so we decided, and that was when people started suggesting that we go over to the town hall, which we did the next year.
Well, that was in the days of horn-rimmed glasses in the Exeter Theater in Boston, and I saw Kenny Baker doing the Mikado, and just fell in love with it. And I guess that was my first time I was aware of Gilbert and Sullivan, and really enjoyed it. Had a great time. And so I was delighted when, in 1961, when Betty put on the play here, and I was not aware of the play, did not know it, just Gilbert and Sullivan by name, came and was just sat there and enjoyed it and lapped it up, and got so interested that I decided I would follow up.
Made you feel good that they thought that the first show was good, and we should go on to bigger and better things.
This was the beginning of a group which would later be known as the Sudbury Savoyards.
Well, as soon as we finished, they started talking about the stage there in Parish Hall was too small, and why didn't we move to the town hall? And also, instead of just a piano, come let's get an orchestra. The orchestra was not easy to come by. I spent hours on the telephone trying to round up all the people for the orchestra. There's no auditions for chorus, but the auditions are for all the leads. And we came up with quite a few people who were interested in it, and we got a pretty good group to do it. I felt that a church production should be something that everyone who wanted to be in it could be in it, either on stage or off stage. And the tradition, I guess, is followed through to now, so that way it's better for everybody to have a chance.
It was clear from the initial success of Trial in 1961, raising over $872, that with hard work and the strength of their volunteer base, this was something they could do again and again. With a larger venue and more time to plan, recruit, and publicize, they performed more Gilbert and Sullivan productions in the coming years.
Well, I think when they were talking about doing the Mikado or doing something else, they were looking for people to be chairman, and I think that's when we volunteered to do it, and enjoyed doing it. I think we just did it for 1 year, but it sort of got everything started off, toward continuing on, which we really didn't think it was going to at the time, but it did.
In the 1967 production year, Lawrence Haworth took over as director of dramatics for Iolanthe, and Will Ford joined on the production side.
He more or less took over the business end of the putting on the show. It was good to have somebody who wanted to do that, because at first Priscilla and I had to do everything. And little by little, there were volunteers that took over that end of the show.
We had lived in England for a couple of years in '65 and '66, and came home just about Christmas time of '66, and we had just started with the church a year or two before we went to England, so we kind of got reestablished back into the church. And Jim Sloan called me one night and asked if I would be co-chairman for this new thing called the Savoyards, which I remembered had been started up during the last couple of years before we went to England, but we'd never really had much to do with it other than going to, I think, one or two of the productions. They were then held in the town hall. Anyway, it turned out that the job of co-chairman was a stepping stone, because the next year Jim stepped aside and left me holding the bag as chairman. We were then as I said, doing the shows in the town hall. So things were on a much smaller scale.
There is a general rule we know, two streets go to every boat. Make up your minds that breathe will breathe, if you've two boats to every street. There is a general rule we know, two streets go to every boat. Make up your minds that breathe will breathe, if you've two boats to every street. Little cross.
You may realize when you look at some of the names in those early programs, there was a lot of overlap between the Sudbury Players and the Savoyards. The church had by no means the kind of talent it took to provide leads for the kind of shows Gilbert and Sullivan wrote, and so we had to immediately go outside the church for lead material. We had a few in the church who could do the job, but an awful lot of the players were heavily involved. Not only Laurie Haworth, but Mike Weinstein, Frank Sherman. Plus, the overlap was also seen in the fact that where we not only used the town hall stage, which the Sudbury Players had outfitted with lighting and all the things they needed for their shows, but we also shared the orchestra pit. We also stored the sets in an old barn that one of the players owned out at his house on the corner of Dutton Road and Hudson Road. At that time, the church didn't have any space for that kind of storage as they do now. About the second or third year that we were in the town hall, they had a problem because their insurance suddenly notified them that they had to have a fireproof curtain for the stage curtain, and they didn't have one. So all productions were shut down at the town hall for a year or two, and I can't remember what the Sudbury Players did, but we moved up to the high school.
That was the year that we moved to the high school, bigger productions, bigger and bigger.
There were a lot more lighting and everything up there that for a production than there was down at the town hall stage, so it was much better. It was a good move.
This of the that so you be gone. You're not just so many, I'm not worth a penny, no word for your guidance is gone. Come on, a very good bargain.
In 1970, Laurie Hallworth sent out an invitation to both singers and musicians from surrounding towns. To quote him, "The Sudbury Savoyards is a unique organization which has no bylaws, no officers, no dues, and no meetings. The only requirement for membership is an interest in the performance of Gilbert and Sullivan operettas."
In those early years, we were borrowing money from the church for the initial startup expenses. We'd usually borrow $250 or $300 from the church in order to get things going. So we had to account for it and make that as a nut before we started making a profit. There were several years when I was very worried that we'd make any profit at all, because it looked as though the net proceeds would be only $500 or $600 perhaps, rather than the larger numbers we finally wound up making. Expenses, of course, were in some areas that you don't have now. We had to rent all the costumes that we used. There was a place up in Haverhill that we would order the costumes from. I'd drive up in a station wagon and bring back a big hamper full of costumes and take them back up after the show was over. One of the problems we had, not problems, but as the years went on, was less and less involvement from people from the church. There were a couple of old regulars. We had Dick Sewell and the Parrows, the Sheets, and myself and Laurie. But it became more and more an operation that was staffed, at least in the cast, by people from outside the church. And matter of fact, that was what led to our planning on making the funds available for relief of world hunger. In the early 70s, it became apparent that the church people had less and less involvement with the cast. And we had a great many people who were not only from the church, many of them were Jewish. They came from all over the Boston area rather than just from Sudbury. And up until that point, we'd been putting our profits just into the church budget as another source of income. And I started to be uncomfortable with asking people who had nothing to do with the church to put in the kind of rehearsal time that it took to put the show on. So Shep Johnson at the time was our minister, and we had a couple of conversations about what changes we ought to make and what we did with the profits, and finally decided that UMCOR, which was still a Methodist organization but had a much broader appeal, was probably a good place to put the profits. And that was when we started that. I remember one recent year, I was amazed to see that you'd given something of the order of $25,000 or $26,000. That was absolutely stunning. I can't imagine. I think it was on one of the very popular shows like Mikado or whatever.
In 1978, when the Mikado was presented for the third time, Betty put down her baton, and the new music director was Will Sherwood, who was also the organist at the Methodist Church.
Most of the staffing of the business side of the operation came out of the church, and most of them were not only church people but good friends of mine. And that was one of the reasons why in in the middle 80s, it became apparent we had to make some change because I was running out of friends. I had the feeling people were avoiding me when I was trying to recruit staffing because they'd all been there and done that, and some of them didn't want to do it anymore. And so I decided it was time to reorganize and go to a much more independent operation, still under the auspices of the church. I didn't want to lose the rehearsal space at Hawes Hall from the church, and so I felt that it was a reasonable swap to retain the church sponsorship, let the church continue to provide rehearsal space and storage space for sets and costumes. It became obvious as the years went on that the Savoyards were becoming one of the outstanding producers of Gilbert and Sullivan in New England, and because we were drawing people for the cast from all over the greater Boston area, and people were coming. We were running into GNS enthusiasts who look forward to our show every year.
Whenever you contemplate producing a play, musical, opera of any kind, you have to make it your own. You have to adapt it to the resources you have available and to your own tastes. And the director, Walter Reed, and I, when we were looking at Princess Ida in 1982, decided there were several things about Princess Ida that either we didn't much care for or thought we could innovate to make it more suitable for our own tastes and for our cast and the Sudbury audience. And one of them was that we felt the introduction that's traditionally performed with Princess Ida was unsatisfying, and that a more an overture that was closer to, say, the Mikado overture or the Yeoman of the Guard overture, something of that scale, would be more in keeping with the grandeur we were contemplating for our production. Similarly, the ending, going into O Dainty Triolet, we found unsatisfying, and something that recapitulates the truth is found, the truth is found, was much more in keeping with our interpretation of that play. Princess Ida, as a relatively obscure Gilbert and Sullivan piece, we felt we had more freedom to improvise in that way than we would with, say, the Mikado. By 1984, the people within the church who had been supporting the Sudbury Savoyards all these years originally, as I say, as a church fundraiser, were getting burned out, were less motivated to support what were in effect a bunch of strangers, and frankly less motivated to support world hunger as opposed to building the sanctuary of the church. And so they were, as I say, ready for a change.
As time evolved, we got more outsiders in. We have many more outsiders than Methodists from the Sudbury Church there. But as they came in, we brought in people that had theatrical experience, people who know about directing and who have studied it and have degrees in it, and people who have experience from other groups. So we're bringing in not only theatrical experiences, but also theatrical nomenclature and organization. So it's evolving into much more of a theater group than a church offspring.
And it fell to Will Ford to pass along the word that the existing organizational structure wouldn't continue, that the performances could continue if somehow a new organization was formed from among the performers. All of the leaders of the productions, as I say, were Methodist Church people, except for the artistic leaders, Michael Cashman and myself. We were the only ones who were not of the Methodist Church that were involved. So rather than sit everyone down and break this news, Will Ford chose Michael and me and Sally and probably a couple of others I don't remember to explain all this to. And somehow I was the one that was chosen to write it down, write up a call to arms and distribute it to the membership, and that was the organizational realities of the Sudbury Savoyards. Apparently it worked, because enough people heeded the call, came forward, said, yes, this is worth preserving. Let's find out what all that behind-the-scenes stuff is that we never knew was happening, but we know we rely on. Let's figure out how to do it ourselves. And by the next year, the new organization was in place and functioning, and it produced Yeomen of the Guard.
Originally, there was some great people, and people that would faithfully come out every year. And now, like Bev has just said, I think there are people with even more talent. I don't know if it's more love, but perhaps more innate talent. And they seem to come from further afar. And so it's given us a little more diversity than we certainly had originally.
The Silver Anniversary season presented the Mikado for the 4th time, another of the big 3 operettas, and this was the first time the performances were videotaped.
Nancy had learned about the existence of the Savoyards through me and my contact with David. I was working with David Larrick at the time, and as he would be too eager to tell you, he was trying to pump up the Savoyards among as many people as he could possibly contact. And when Nancy found out that it was open chorus and one didn't need to audition, she thought this was a perfect way to break into theater herself.
Well, it's David Larrick's fault. It's all David Larrick's fault for getting me involved with Sudbury. And we had done a couple of shows in Wesleyan together, one of which was Cox and Box. And we were basically our own dramaturgs on that.
I first met Michael Cashman at Wesleyan University in Connecticut, where I was a junior when he was a freshman, and so he was 2 years behind me, and we were both active in the theater. He was a theater major, I was a music major and math major, doing a lot in the theater. And we collaborated a great deal, including we did a production of Cox and Box together. So when I got involved with the Sudbury group and Michael was in the area, I let him know that we were looking for someone to be King Gamma in the '82 Princess Ida. He came and auditioned and blew everybody away. But it was really when he was chosen as director and I sat down next to him at auditions that I really felt comfortable. I had an artistic partner whom I've worked with before. The phrase I use is I felt like I was coming home. We had a vocabulary in common. We could speak in very cryptic phrases about the characteristics of particular actors who were auditioning for us.
The girls got involved early because when we started going to work days on Saturday, Nancy was there because she was a seamstress and was working on costume stuff. I got drawn in somewhat gradually, perhaps, over a course of weeks or months to begin contributing to the carpentry at first, and maybe some of the lighting and electrical stuff.
Well, I grew up in this church, and so, for many years I saw my friends' parents doing really cool stuff in costumes and on a stage, and then my Sunday school teacher was wearing fairy wings and a tiara, and I'm like, well, I've got to get involved in that when I'm old enough. Through the youth group, the MYF Methodist Youth Fellowship, we were always expected to usher, work the lobby, the concessions and things, so we did that, which is how we got to see the shows too. My friend Vicky Farmer's mother was conducting the orchestra, and my friend Lisa Ford, her father, was running the show practically. So this was always something that I was just always aware of, from being involved in the church.
I can't get into this without talking about David Larrick enough. David and I worked together at Digital. He joined the Video Terminals group where I had already been working for a couple of years. And as I said, he was intent on talking up the Savoyards and his theatrical stuff and musical stuff in general to as great a degree as anyone who would listen to him would stand. And as he started to tell me about this stuff, he would give me background about who Gilbert and Sullivan were and how they were important in musical theater and stuff and what he was doing.
David was my drive down to the lunch between the matinee and the evening show that day. And I'm trying to figure out a way of, finding out how I get the job to do that. And we're driving along, and he's saying something like, as I remember, it was something like that. He was saying, well, I was talking to Will Ford, and I was wondering if you would be, yes, please, let me.
Just the sort of Russian I enjoy.
It's just the sort of Russian you enjoy.
Probably by a keen desire to evoke all the blessed from a matrimony's yoke. We shall toddle off tomorrow when we've seen us and it's over to settle in the town of Basingstoke. Probably by a keen desire to evoke all the blessed from a matrimony's yoke. Then we'll toddle off tomorrow from the scene of sin. It's over to settle in the town of Basingstoke. Want to settle in the town of Basingstoke. Then we'll toddle off tomorrow from the scene of sin. It's over to settle in the town.
I guess the time that I was getting involved in the group was in the beginning of what we might call the modern Savoyards, and Sally was the chairman. And as David did, was eager to introduce new people to the group. Sally also, as part of her nominating committee adventures, hit me up once to join the board. When I wrote my candidate statement, the one that gets posted up for the cast to look at during Tech Week and beyond, I said, well, this is what I've been doing. You don't see me every week because I'm building the sets, but all these makeup mirrors that are new this year, I built those in my basement. So this is the kind of stuff that I can do for the Savoyards. I got elected.
I grew up with listening to Gilbert and Sullivan. I didn't start seeing any until I was in junior high school and high school. So an awful lot of things that were done in Boston, because there was an awful lot of really crappy Gilbert and Sullivan that was being done, and I took this as a chance to, maybe I can help fix that.
I've been doing GNS for a very long time. I got the theater bug when I was in high school, 14, I think, high school freshman. I was in my first show, and so by the time I got to be 16, I was ready to go out and do community theater?
I think I was probably about 6. My father was in the Pittsburgh Savoyards, and he'd probably been doing it even before I was 6, but that's kind of when I remember going to see his shows and being just like, wow, my dad's on stage and he doesn't look like my dad, kind of thing. So Savoyards, not only Savoyards, but that's kind of where I got interested in theater as well.
I looked on the web and found this group in Sudbury and said, hey, that looks interesting. I'd like to do that. I moved to this area. I had actually been over in Amsterdam with my husband. We moved back to the area, and I missed the auditions for the group. But I found out I could be in the chorus without auditioning. So I showed up for the first rehearsal and got into the chorus. Nobody knew me from anyone, of course. And it was a great group, very welcoming, very friendly, had lots of fun.
I was first in the 1987 Iolanthe. That was my first show, Kathy Hardwick, because I was not married at that point. And in fact, it was kind of funny when I came back for the 88 Utopia, and was listed as Kathy LeGue. I think it was actually Nancy Powers who sort of wondered, why didn't Kathy Hardwick come back?
I was chomping at the bit to get on that stage when I was 16. And that was the first year that they did Sorcerer. And I remember Will Ford was chairman, and I remember going to his house to listen to the show on a very scratchy LP, and sitting crammed in on the floor with all these other adults and my teachers and other people from the community, and singing along with it and not having a clue what the big picture was at the time, how the structure of the organization worked. It was just something I wanted to have fun with.
I've been in a lot of musical organizations, and I love music. So that was my way into this group. But the reason that I've been around in it for so long is because of the mission, because we're doing something with our talents that is way beyond the norm for a performance group.
It's a great group, and just had fun doing it. And the camaraderie at the rehearsals, and you know, with the people, and of course the excitement on the stage, and the parties before and after and so forth, just made it a great experience, and a great way to spend the winter in New England.
One of the really nice things about these shows is that they are family friendly. And I mean that not only on the stage, but backstage as well. I have a good friend in this group, and when she discovered she was the same age as my mother, she was absolutely floored. She realized she could be my mother, but she didn't think of me, you know, as being, you know, about her daughter's age. She thought of me as a friend. So it's just an interesting thing. It crosses a lot of boundaries.
Yeah, I think I like to think that as things went along, you know, each production got a little better than the one that was behind it, because we had something to prove to each other.
In '95, I was asked by Sally Osborne, presumably because I did such a great job with David Larrick in '94, to be the stage co-director for Mikado. And again, I was sort of, you know, does that mean I can't audition? Because I wanted to audition for Yum Yum. And they said, well, no, not necessarily, but here's the situation. And that's basically when I realized that how sick Sally was with the cancer that actually would eventually kill her. Because it wasn't in the '93 show when it was actually kind of announced to the cast. So while I knew this was really the first interactions I'd had with Sally since. So I think I don't even remember if I did an audition or if I decided not to, because they were very upfront about it, that I might have to take over. And I don't know, but I believe the board might have had some trepidation about having Sally direct at all, just in case, but again, because of Sally's history, and I support them wholeheartedly if this was indeed their decision to let her do it. And in October, November, when we were having these discussions, it seemed like, yeah, okay, I'm just going to help out, that'll be fine. But unfortunately, Sally took a pretty severe turn for the worst, I think, just after Christmas. And while she was still coming to rehearsals, she was finding it very difficult. And so I had to step in. So yes, that was my first directing experience. I wouldn't recommend that that's anybody's first experience.
Well, it was in 1996 where I first got my first internet connection. And I was living in Rockport at the time. And I searched Gilbert and Sullivan just to see what came up. And I was surprised to find 4 performing groups in the area. One at MIT, one at Harvard, one in Carlisle, the Savoyard Light Opera Company, and the Sudbury Savoyards. Because I was interested in playing in the orchestra at the time. I was a clarinet player. And I really wanted to play with full orchestras. And those 4 groups amazingly had full orchestras in their productions. I tracked down Bill and Nancy Burdine, who did the orchestra managing both for the Savoyard Light Opera Company and the Sudbury Savoyards, and told them about my interest, and I was a clarinet player and I wanted to play. I was talking to Bill originally, and I asked about the Sudbury Savoyards, and Bill said, well, you know, we have a lot of our regulars. I'll put you on the list, but we don't really need anybody at the time. A short while later, I got a call from Nancy Burdine, saying that the Savoyard Light Opera Company in Carlisle is doing Ruddigore, and would I like to play clarinet for that? That being my favorite and my first foot in the door, I gladly accepted that, and I played clarinet for that show. After that show closed, I got a call the very next day from the Burdines asking me to play clarinet in the Yeoman of the Guard in Sudbury, which I was kind of surprised at, because they just told me that they really didn't have any openings. I always hope to think that they saw or heard my playing in the Slock production and gave me a chance in Sudbury, and that's where it all began.
I was always in the chorus. You do not have to audition for the chorus, which is the only way I was going to get on that stage singing. I can't sing. I still can't read music to this day, but I managed just fine.
Yeah, it's very important to me and to the group that the chorus be open without auditions. It leads to the inclusivity of the group and to the mentality of the group as a whole as, sure, come on in, we'll find something that you can do.
To have this chorus audition would have kept so many people off that stage. Not only was I happy that people didn't have to audition for it, but I also made certain that the choruses were grouped by vocal type. Because if you have someone singing your part with you, you're going to feel more confident, you're going to sing out and stronger.
But I love to sing in a group. It is great fun. Love to sing with people.
In 2000, Ruddigore was presented for the 4th time, but it was done in February, with an extended run of 2 weekends. Kathy Legue was stage director, with Steve Malionik making his debut as music director.
By 2000, I had, with all the performing groups that I discovered, I played a fair number of shows. As I was sitting in the orchestra pit, I started saying to myself, well, gee, why is the conductor taking that tempo? And boy, if I was directing, this is what I would do there. So when 2000 Ruddigore production came up, I decided I would interview for music director. And that way, I could get a choice to give my interpretation of the operas. I could take my tempos. And it was a step up from being in the orchestra, being led, to actually leading on the podium.
When Steve Malionik was presented to me, quote, as the music director. We have this person who's interested in music. I have to admit, I barely kind of remembered Steve from the Pit. I had conducted him twice, actually, in Pinafore and Iolanthe, but, I know who he is, and I know he plays clarinet well, but that's all I know about him, really. But if he wants to do the job, that's fine with me.
Well, I have a long association with Kathy Legue as a director, but she first caught my eye during the 1997 production of Yeoman of the Guard, which is the first show I played in the orchestra in Sudbury. She was actually on stage as Elsie Maynard. Well, following my original, my first production with Rodegor, the next year was The Gondoliers, and followed by The Sorcerer and Patience. I learned a lot that first year. Rodegor was the first year I did any directing, so I really had nothing, no past experience to go on. And each year during the following productions, I'd learn a little bit more. I knew what worked, what didn't work. How can I arrange this rehearsal to run a little better? Of course, I had a lot more confidence in myself. As a conductor, I always tried to make the orchestra experience one that would want people to come and play a show for free, because they're going to get a good musical experience out of it. It is a hard job. There's a lot of phone calls. Recruiting the orchestra is probably one of the hardest tasks to do. I've done it myself. I know the people who've done it for me. The production is time intensive between all of the rehearsals and 7 or so performances. It's hard to find players who have all the time available. This is a all-volunteer organization, so there's no financial compensation. So that sometimes makes it difficult to find players who really want to play for money.
The single big show was the driving force behind the Savoyards for the first 25 or 30 years. But in the early 90s, we started to do other things, like proposed a sing-out group to be able to go around, and the urgings of some people that eventually turned into a summer show.
And in '96, I think I pretty much acted alone when I wanted to put together a summer production that would take advantage of the Sudbury Savoyards mailing list, collection of Victorian costumes, and competence in putting on theater. And also the fact that the church facility was pretty much unused all summer because, as the old joke in the area goes, God goes to the Cape, don't you know? And it seemed to me that combination of opportunities was too good to pass up.
I think people were happy with one big Gilbert and Sullivan show a year. So David proposed a summer show to fill the void that exists in community theater between May and September.
There are people who absolutely can't stand Gilbert and Sullivan. My father was one of them. He says, I'll come and support you, but they're all alike. You just change the costumes year after year. So I think the summer show aspect does hit a target market that normally are not going to come see a Gilbert and Sullivan show, or they're not around in the wintertime. We've done small, farces and comedies, and we've done some Gilbert written shows. We've done Noel Coward. We did a Neil Simon once, California Suite, which was the last year we performed in Haas Hall because the temperature is just unbearable. It was one of our heat waves, and we lost the majority of our audience before the play was over. So we moved up to Curtis Middle School, which is air conditioned. Though we're paying a lot more to do it, we've been able to get a lot of our audience back.
So there have been people who have come to a summer production and stuck around for main show productions, which is very satisfying. And it's a nice, it's an excellent place to try out new jobs. It's a nice change of pace and a nice switch for people in the group that want to keep going in the summer. It's generally a smaller group of people. Some are different than in the main show, but it's a very intense experience because it's a smaller group. And lots of fun.
Once the Savoyards started their summer series in '97, and I did not participate in Charlie's Aunt. I think I sewed a costume. That was all I did. So Ernest, it's always been one of my favorite plays. So, and I'd seen Charlie's Aunt, so it's like, okay, this will work. It's a good venue. The smaller stage is kind of nice. We built out the thrust, so it's bigger than the stage you actually see if you go in the hall.
Charlie's Aunt was something that was just an absolute godsend for me. David had been for a long time trying to get something done in the summer, and board said, well, okay, let's see what happens. He's been a good member of the company, and he's been after this. Let's see what happens. And I suppose the idea is like, okay, if it doesn't work, well, then we don't have to do this anymore. And the idea of looking for a play to do, but try to keep it in the spirit of what we did. And Charlie's Aunt is a show that I had just loved for a very, very long time. And the chance to do that made things just a wonderful opportunity for me. Got a nice run out of that. It was a fun show to do. And a lot of the people who were new to the show then, came on board as chorus and principals in the main stage shows too. And we raised more money with the summer show that year too, which was jolly good fun.
Sorcerer is a difficult play because the hero is really not a very likable person, if you call the hero the tenor, Alexis. Because he really kind of plays this nasty trick on the entire village. It all turns out badly, even though he's kind of been warned that this night might not be the best thing to do. It turns against him, and it was fine for everybody except me, and now that it's not working, well, I don't want this to happen anymore. And what can happen? What can we do about it? And, well, the deal is, well, either he or the sorcerer who actually casts the spell basically has to go to hell. And everyone decides it's the sorcerer, and I'm like, that's not really right. He did what he was asked to do. It was Alexis's idea. So I think a lot of people have that feeling for sorcerer, and between the theater tales of the Mystery of Edwin Drood, where people vote, that had come out a couple of years earlier. I sort of had this day, everybody always kids around about this. Oh, we should have people vote. And, Alexis should go, not Wells. And I said, why don't we just put it up to a vote? So we worked it out that we were going to have cards in the audience, and I specifically asked the lighting people of what colors would show up best from someone on stage going into the house. What could they see? And they said, well, yellow and red would probably be the best. Okay. So one side was yellow, one side was red. One side had an A for Alexis, the other side had W for Wells. And I said, all right, cast, this is what we're going to do. And I gave the notary, because he's actually the first person who says, die thou. And of course, in the score, he's supposed to indicate Wells. That was Tony Parks, and I took Tony aside. I said, it's your decision. You're the one that's going to see it. You decide based on what you see. And then I told the cast, I don't care what you see, you go with Tony, because he's the one that's going to decide. They're like, oh, okay, yeah, we get it. I think Alexis went 5 out of 7.
So be it, I submit, my fate is sealed to popular opinion. Thus I yield. Be happy all, leave me to my despair. I go, it matters not with whom or where.
So The Sorcerer was one of the shows that didn't have a decent vocal score at the time. This was in 2002 when we did that show. So the reason to do a vocal score in that case is to get something nice for the cast to read. It's hard enough to learn the notes, learn the words, but if you're having trouble seeing them, or you can't tell if that's an A or a G because the note is smudged or the line is not there, that's a sign that you really need to do something. And there was nothing available at the time, so I took on the task of producing a new vocal score for The Sorcerer, and it actually worked out very well. The cast had a nice, clean piece of music to read from. It took a long time, but it was good for the production, it was good for the company.
The year I directed Pirates was the last year in the old high school. And then the following year we were in the new high school space. So there were many issues regarding that space. We had tried to have a lot of input into the building of it through our residents, Sudbury residents in town, and made it known to the board of the school and the town how we thought of ourselves as a Sudbury institution, and we wanted to stay in Sudbury, and so we still wanted to use the space in the school.
In 2005, the new high school was built, so that meant a new performing space for us, including for a first time an actual orchestra pit. So we had some adjustments to make. Well, everyone in the company had adjustments to make. With the orchestra, it's the first time we were actually in a pit, so it was we had to make some adjustments to how we're hearing ourselves and what the balance is between, from the audience standpoint. The orchestra is a lot further down, so it's harder to hear the singers. So we had to make some adjustments there, and we had to just learn the space.
If you want to know who we are gentlemen of Japan. Born many a bars and jar, born many a screen and fan.
Choosing the show, and that became a bit of a ritual in that every year in the early fall, he and I would arrange to have lunch at a little joint up in Concord that was called the Willow Pond Kitchen. It isn't even there anymore. It's in the area that now is the National Park on the road between Lexington and Concord. We get down there and have a hamburger and a couple of beers and sit down and figure out what show hadn't we done for a while and what would seem to fit what we thought we wanted to do. And by the time we got through with lunch, we'd figured out what the show was going to be, and off we went.
After the cast party would be done, about a month or so later, David or I would get a call from Will. So what do you guys feel like doing next year? And it was, listen, well, I think this is kind of what we'd like to do, kind of keeping an eye on not just what the performance history was and trying not to do anything too soon or too soon after another company might have done it too nearby. Try to think of what's going to be best for us to do as collaborators and what's going to be best for the company to do. Because what the chorus became capable of doing over those couple of years is just mind-boggling. They really were a huge part of the action, and did what the chorus was supposed to do, but also did it in a storytelling way that I don't think ever distracted from the from where the focus was supposed to be.
Our repertoire is fairly limited by the fact that they've only had a dozen operas, roughly a dozen. You know, whether you count Thespis or not, it doesn't really have much music that has survived. But so we have to be careful about how often we repeat shows, and we have to be careful to stagger popular shows with less popular shows so that we keep our audience numbers up and keep interest in the group. You can't do the same three, we call them the big three, the most three popular shows. You can't do them year after year after year. You'll lose interest.
We don't perform all the Gilbert and Sullivans, though we have branched out to do a couple that aren't as well known, such as Utopia Limited, which we did 2 years ago now. The Grand Duke we only have performed once. That was in 2006, thanks to Steve Malionik, who really pushed for it, and he was music director, and it was a very successful show, though I think the curiosity factor brought the audience and the cast out because people wanted to add that to the repertoire, saying, you know, I've done X amount of Gilbert and Sullivan shows, and all of a sudden here was this opportunity to do one I've never done before.
Well, the board meetings are open to the entire membership, so anyone who wants to bring an idea to the board is welcome to come and do it. For instance, we have a member who every year has been lobbying for the same show ever since I've been in the group. And of course, he can come to a board meeting and put that out there.
In 2005, I proposed doing The Grand Duke to the Board of Trustees. This is an operetta that's rarely performed. It's not as well known as some of the others. It's rather long. It's got a convoluted storyline. It's one of the operettas that Gilbert and Sullivan didn't do much cutting in. It was at the end of their careers. It's the last one they wrote. So it doesn't get performed that often. But I had found a CD of it, and I had been listening to the music. I didn't really know the story all that well, but listening to the music over and over again, it started growing on me. And I said, boy, this is a fun song. This is a fun song. So I started looking into the possibility of the Sudbury Savoyards doing it. They had never done it in the history of the organization. And I knew it needed work, a lot of work, because you know, editing an operetta is not an easy task. And knowing what to cut, you know, what do you cut? You know, how to get it to a reasonable time slot, how to get the storyline so that the audience will understand it and get it and fit it in one night of theater. Paula Moravec was the stage director that year, and she helped and edited some of the lyrics. And we got it down to about a 2.5-hour show. I thought it was very successful. A lot of the cast members enjoyed it immensely. We even got some comments that, you know, this one, The Grand Duke, is now my favorite.
But I've been engaged to him for the last 20 years.
20 years? There, my dear. They can't get over that. Take him. He's yours. And hold him as tight as you can.
My own.
Here's another! The fourth in 24 hours! Would anybody else like to marry me? You, man! Oh, you! Anybody! I'm getting used to it.
The Yeoman of Regard did turn out to be something more like a Lifetime Achievement Award than a Savoyard of the Year, which is quite consistent with my vision for it, because we wanted to go back and capture the history, the contributions of people who were gone, maybe forgotten, or still around but not recognized for what they'd done. So we came up with a set of criteria, and the catchphrase, I used to repeat it all the time, has left me from time to time, but it's exemplary service in fulfilling the goals of the Savoyards, and that breaks down into creating some founding effort for the things that make the group what it is, the existence of the summer show, the continuity of the parade float, extraordinary accomplishment, either artistic or technical, in terms of carrying the group forward in some ways, life-saving efforts. If the group were ever in danger of dissolving, when somebody would find a way to hold it together by writing a letter of support. Those are the things that we would look forward to. And so many of the early honorees were people I had in mind, people like Sally and David, and of course the founders, Betty Farmer and Laurie Harworth, and all the people who got the group off the ground and developed enough momentum for it to exist on its own after the first 4 or 5 or 6 years. These are the people that I thought were the models for what the yeoman should be.
One of the things that is remarkable about the Sudbury Savoyards is the volunteerism, the number of people that it takes to put on a show, the number of people that are willing to give their time, from the cast to the tech staff and to the orchestra, is one of the greatest things that this group has.
We have some orchestra members who travel very long distances to be in the group, you know, from the North Shore or South Shore, just because they like the group and they enjoy GNS. And some of them are also very committed to the mission of the group to raise money for a World Hunger Relief Organization. We are almost to $200,000 donated to the United Methodist Committee on Relief. With the donation we're going to make in May, we're going to be up to $195,000. So we're hoping by the end of this year to hit $200,000. We still have the summer show and we have the craft fair in the fall coming up.
$185,000 in the last 20 or 30 years is an amazing contribution to a charity that works so well with our sponsor, Sudbury United Methodist Church. The saying of all proceeds devoted to the relief of world hunger is a wonderful hook to put on to get people to recognize things. One of the amazing things about that money is that it reflects 100% of what the Savoyards have realized monetarily over those times.
I think it's important to tell people, listen, this money we're donating is not going to any sort of infrastructure. The church takes care of that. The United Methodist Church pays all the administrative costs, so that the money we're donating is going straight into relief efforts on the ground. And since the money we're donating isn't designated towards any particular cause, it goes into the emergency fund. So for instance, this check in May may end up in Japan. It may end up in Haiti. It may end up in Louisiana. You just never know where the money's going to go, but it's going to go where it's needed to help people right now.
The donations to World Hunger are just astounding, and I know everybody I talk to is always amazed that the Savoyards does this, is that they turn over the profits and that absolutely no one is paid. And
none of that money went to any of the members in compensation for their services. And it's an unusual group that doesn't manage to give at least a stipend for personal activity within the group. I think it's a wonderful number. I wish it could be much larger, on the other hand, because there are costs that the Savoyards have to maintain that eat into that in a frightening way. The cost of cloth to make costumes, and the rental charges for equipment, and of course the rent of the performance venue itself are expenses that make the grand scale feasible, but regrettably chew into it. But I think that on the whole, because of the charitable nature of the organization and its very bylaws, it's a wonderful donation. We can get to 200,000 in short order. We will make an enormous milestone.
Lovers caught me talking to another. Oh, 5 or 7 years ago. I tell her very plainly that the lady is my mother. Taradiddle, toddle, she will believe my statement and declares we must be parted, because on a career of double dealing I've started, then gives a hand to one of you and leaves him broken hearted. Taradiddle, toddle, nowhere's a general rule below. Through streets of to every row.
Behind the scenes, we have a Saturday Tech Day every day, and that's where families really participate. We send out notices, or they know in advance every Saturday from January 1st through put in. We're painting, we're building. So there's all levels of work. If for some child with a paintbrush, to do some base coating, it doesn't matter, how good that job is. To people cutting out costumes or just pinning hemlines. We will always find something for somebody to do at whatever level that they're comfortable with or willing to participate, even if it's just showing up at the end and cleaning up.
Well, the 2008 production of The Yeoman of the Guard, I was not directing, but I still had my hand in the show. There was a need for halberts for the yeoman warders, and I was intrigued by that project. Again, being an organ builder, I have a lot of woodworking experience and a lot of parts lying around in our shop. So I decided to make a set of halberts, and I delivered them only to find out that there was a miscount and we needed 2 more. So I ended up making 2 more. It was on Valentine's Day of that year, and but the show must go on.
I have one instance in which I personally came to a Saturday work day, and there was a hat that needed to be made, and I sat there and I pleated. I did about 150 tiny little pleats on this hat that I knew that anyone past the 3rd row in the audience was not going to see. But it was just pleat after pleat and pinning them and sewing them in to this frame. And so every time I looked at that hat up on stage, I was proud, and every time I saw that actress put on the hat, I was thrilled to see it. And there's a lot of that. You do this for someone else, and they do something for you. There's a lot of reciprocity.
I'm not sure why I chose that year to do the set design. It may have been that the other set designers were burned out. I know I enjoyed doing a set design a great deal. I know that one feature of it was a very tall set piece that was the pinnacle of the Rocky Mountain in Act 1 that pivoted down to become a wall of the ruined chapel in Act 2. We built this 16-foot long piece indoors early in the production schedule, and okay, that's great. The next step is to take it outside and test the tilting mechanism, which you couldn't do inside Hawes Hall because it only has 11-foot ceilings. And that winter was so cold, so miserable, so snowy, that it was, I think, the week before put-in that we finally could take the thing outside and test it, leaving us very little time to fix any problems. Fortunately, it worked flawlessly the first time, and we didn't have a problem.
Well, designing sets for the Savoyards in those days was a question of knowing what the flat inventory was. But we had some really nice stone walls for the castles, so that came in handy for patients. And they let me rent a drop for the second act, which also meant that after the first act on the Saturday night, they could start striking that set and get people to the cast party that much sooner afterward. For what I tried to do with the set designs there is, again, being my own dramaturg on that, I wanted to do research and see what floor plan Gilbert used, and or if he had more than one production, did this floor plan change with him over time?
I don't know how I did it. It was my first time as technical director. It was my first time as a set designer. It was a double bill, and I designed 2 sets and oversaw the construction for both, and as technical director oversaw the run of the show itself. It is almost always the case. We had excellent technical help with it, with set engineering and such, and that all of the requests from the directors for, gee, can I have one more platform to do this? Can I have another set of stairs over here to do this? Can we add more dressing to the ship's deck so that it looks more lived in? We had people to follow up on. One of the strengths of the Savoyards as a company, inherited from the early 80s when the modern Savoyards were born, was the concept of the task list, where every sanctioned activity in the organization had a job description, so that the technical director and the stage directors and the playbill editor and such had a list of checklist essentially of what had been needed to be done to get their deliverables finished.
Because we build it all in parts here in Haas Hall. It has to be stored in parts on the stage or down in the workshop, and then it has to be able to be transported up to the school, and literally in one Saturday.
We are blessed with a lot of storage space at the church that we can use to store these costumes. We have just started renting out equipment, stage equipment, set pieces, things like that. We don't do nearly as much of that as we do of costumes because we have this huge inventory of costumes, and Janice Dallas has done a wonderful job of keeping track of it all, which is, that's the part that is the challenge, really keeping track of what actually do we have up there in the attic, and she knows exactly what's in there, and it has her folder full of photos and her lists of what's in every single box up there, and makes it very easy to go and pick out what you want and rent from us. So that's a nice revenue stream.
We did used to rent them all, and at some point we started building them ourselves and storing them and putting them out for rent, which is another source of income for us. And we are now very widely known by all the New England companies, and people go to our website from all over the world. We've rented to Canada, and lots of other places. Our yeoman costumes, for example, the work that went into those, we couldn't possibly replace them for what we rent them for, but nobody else can do it either, so they rent from us. Our fairy costumes, we're actually probably on our 3rd set because the original ones just rotted, from wear and tear. Our Mikado costumes, I think that inventory started with Sally Osborne, who collected antique kimonos, and she donated her kimono collection to us when she passed away in 1995. And those we don't use as costumes. They're more really museum pieces. But they started showing us the quality and how we could actually duplicate those.
I know so much more technically than I did. I've learned about lights. I've learned about backstage things and stage managing. I've learned a lot about sound recently. We've started using microphones in the sound equipment.
That tends to be the fabric of the organization. You're not just in the cast. You are always doing something in addition to showing up to rehearsals and being on stage. And everybody is willing to do it, which is the wonderful thing about the organization, is you take on more than one responsibility. Sometimes it does turn out to be larger than you thought when you committed to it, well a year in advance. But there's always people to support you. There's always the person who had the job before you willing to train and assist and mentor, which is how this organization, I think, has sustained itself for 50 years. It's definitely a community recruitment. It's friends and family. It's using media, Theater 411. We'll put the word out if we're looking for particular people, designers, makeup, costumes, crew, whatever. Word of mouth, friends who say, gee, it looks like fun what you do. Well, come to a tech day, help us paint. And and they get sucked in very easily. Family members especially. You know, we're up to third generations being on stage or behind the scenes, which is wonderful.
Now, I've been impressed when I've seen some of the earlier pictures for some of the productions, because I guess just before I had come along, David had stepped in as assistant music director and then as music director for that Pirates that was done before I came on board. And from my understanding of things, he did a great deal to bring up the level of musicianship and orchestral playing that was done in the pit. And I like to think I did a lot to just bring in, the idea of stagecraft. We are doing theater. We're not just doing Gilbert and Sullivan.
So the invention of the shirt was both practical and political, in the sense of as our production values have grown over the years and the number of people who deal with technical issues has grown, we've needed to identify those people. Other organizations have uniforms for their technical staff, for their run staff, and so forth. And it also worked very nicely in connection with the politics of the organization to draw attention to the cohesiveness of the technical crews. So I coined the phrase. I take credit for it, although there are people who say that I must have pulled it from other references elsewhere. Tech is what keeps the cast from performing pale and naked on a dark, empty stage. And it scans well and includes most of the technical disciplines. I couldn't get props and sound in there in a way that made everything balance, but it's become an amazingly popular attribute of the company. As we've brought in other people who see the shirt and want the shirt, they take the shirt, they wear it to other companies and helps our recruiting. Other companies have taken the slogan as their own, and that's fine too, because I think it's a wonderful description about what the technical disciplines do, and technical disciplines in many cases get far too little credit in their own organizations. So if other people want to build on this practical and political aspect of it, I think it's great. The back of the shirt says, Gilbert and Sullivan on a grand scale since 1961. And there aren't too many companies that can steal that. So that's still ours.
Did you find that?
That phrase came from David Larrick as well, and I think it might have been just an off-the-cuff comment on his regard one time in reference to who we are. But that's another element of publicity and promotion that I've used ever since we did the shirts, and in many contexts, because there aren't a lot of community theater groups that can field as big a cast with as cohesive a technical organization to pull off full staging, to stick an almost 30-piece orchestra in the pit and get everybody rehearsing and performing together. You'd be hard-pressed to find too many community theater groups that can pull that together with the continuity that we have.
Discover what it is to be a lover. Some young lady is selected, poor perhaps but well connected, whom you hail for love is blind as the queen of fairy kind.
Call her Princess Sarah. Yes, we're calling the rose from Florence. We are the expert first like guns, first like guns, first like guns. We are the expert first like guns, first like guns, first like guns. You got this like guns.
Well, with the 2010 production of Princess Ida, Kathy and I, again, teamed up to direct. That was a milestone for me personally, because following that show, I would have played I have played or directed all of the existing operettas. So that was quite a feat. I haven't directed them all, I haven't played them all, but between the two, I have touched on every single one.
Search throughout the panorama for a sign of royal gamma, whom today should cross the water with his fascinating daughter. Ida is her name. Oh, God is wise, that love is light, and always sigh their unillumined eyes.
We are warriors three, sons of Gamma Rex. Like most sons are we, masculine in sex.
Oh, dainty violet, oh, fragrant violet, oh, gentle violet, oh, little sigh, oh, sweeter melody, no mere inanity, to touch their vanity we will rely.
One of the traditions with the Savoyards, with the orchestra, is following a performance, the cast gathers and applauds the orchestra as they go back to their room to put their instruments away. It's an amazing tradition. It's the only group that I've ever played with that actually does that.
We affectionately started calling it running the gauntlet, because that's what the orchestra member said it really felt like. But we called it clapping the orchestra.
It's a good feeling. As a player, when I started with the group, I experienced that first time in Yeoman of the Guard in 1997. And it was quite an amazing feeling that the cast appreciates the work of the orchestra that much. Another tradition that the Sudbury Savoyards has is using a full orchestra with the productions. Many theater groups, because of money and space, have to use smaller pit bands, which works except that there's a lot of the parts that are missing. You just can't have the sound that you need. But with the Sudbury Savoyards, we've always been able to use a full orchestra that Arthur Sullivan used during his time, so we get the sound that he had intended for these operettas.
13 stage directors, 11 music directors, and 49 years have paved the way to our 2011 50th anniversary double bill production of Trial by Jury and HMS Pinafore.
We wanted this year, the 50th year, to be a very big deal. So that's why we chose Trial and Pinafore to do at the same time, because that's a great, exciting thing to do in your 50th year. We didn't want to have a lesser-known show on our 50th year. We wanted it to be a big deal and have lots and lots of people, as many people as we could, involved. And what better way than doing 2 shows instead of 1?
The hour of 10 is sounding, hearts with anxious fears are pounding, all of justice crowds surrounding, breathing hope and fear. For today in this arena, sounded by a stern subpoena, answered by Angelina, shortly will appear.
Oh, I was like that when a lad, a shocking young scamp of a rover. I behaved like a regular cad, but that sort of thing is all over. I am now a respectable chap, and shine with a virtue resplendent, and therefore I haven't a scrap of sympathy with the defendant.
Happy be thy life, O maid, happy be thy life, O maid, happy be thy life, O maid.
We sail the ocean blue, and the saucy ship's a beauty. We are sober men and true. to Argentine. When the balls whistle free over the bright blue sea, we stand to our guns all day. We're very, very good, and be it understood, he commands a right good crew.
Though related to a peer, I can hand, reef, and steer, or ship a salvagee. I'm never known to quail at the fury of the gale, and I'm never, never sick at sea.
What, never?
No, never.
What, never?
Well, hardly ever.
Not of the seas, and when I've married thee, I'll be true to the devotion that my love implants.
Then goodbye to your sisters and your cousins and your aunts, especially your cousins whom you reckon up by dozens.
Goodbye to your sisters and your cousins and your aunts, especially your cousins whom you reckon up by dozens and your aunts. For he is an Englishman, for he himself has said it, and this brings me to his praying that he is an Englishman, that he is an Hooray! Hooray!
50 years, 1961 to 2011. The group has maintained its focus. Again, there are a lot of groups that can't maintain a continuing cycle of doing only Gilbert and Sullivan shows, which is where the growth of the organization in other areas has helped maintain the continuity of the group, as it doesn't have to be the same thing all the time. What will carry us forward is the community that develops from that. The size of our casts, the open chorus, allows people to come in and stay with the organization without having to prove themselves every year. If you do a little arithmetic, you find out that from 1961 back to when Gilbert and Sullivan were alive was a little over 50 years. I believe they both died sometime in the early 20th century. And the strongest of their shows was 15 or 20 years before that. So the Savoyards started when the Gilbert and Sullivan legend was perhaps 75 years old. 50 years on, now it's been more than a century.
50 years is a long time for anything to last, and to have the Sudbury Savoyards going strong for these 50 years is truly remarkable. Especially starting out in 1961 as a bunch of choir members trying to raise money for their church. Who would have thought that it would go from that to the elaborate productions that we have now with full cast, full orchestra, lighting, scenery. So to reach 50 years of that and hopefully another 50 more is truly remarkable. The volunteer aspect, again, is one of the greatest aspects of this group, and the donations. The group has donated $185,000 plus of money to World Hunger Relief. But what better way to help the community and produce great theater and have a lot of great fun doing it.